Так, окей. Ладно, всяких там ебанатов. Господи, сколько ебанатов вообще развелось на этих серверах? Вообще пиздец.
In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to download and install two
Просто
things that we're going to
ебаные
need going
нерды.
forward
Их
in this
так
course.
смешно троллить, сука. Truly a бедолага. Блять, меня опять нахуй забанили.
The first thing and the most important is called MySQL. And MySQL is a relational database management system, which basically means it's a software application which we can use to maintain and create and do all that sort of stuff with databases. And so when we have MySQL installed on our computer, we can actually set up what's called a MySQL database server. And that'll basically be a server where MySQL is running, and then we can write SQL and all sorts of queries and instructions in order to create and do all sorts of stuff with databases. So the first thing we'll do is download and install MySQL. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to install another program which is called PopSQL or PopSQL, and it's basically a program that I'm going to be using in this course in order to kind of like write out all my queries. It's essentially a text editor, but it's a text editor that can hook up with our MySQL database, and it'll just be a really easy interface and a really easy way for us to write queries and get the information back. So I'm going to show you guys how to download and install both of those things. The first thing we want to do is open up our browser, and we're going to install MySQL. So you just want to come up here, and you're just going to search in Google for MySQL Community Server. So MySQL Community Server is this first link right here. It's just dev.mysql.com. And this is actually a free and open source piece of software.
MySQL, MySQL.
Where it's basically and
MySQL community.
This is actually a free and open source piece of software. It's basically like the most basic version of MySQL that we can use, and it's the version that we're going to be using. So if you're a beginner, this is probably what you want to go for. It's kind of just like a great environment for you to learn in, and it's pretty simple. So down here you have a couple different options. You could download just like a zip, or you can download the actual installer. So you'll see over here there's this option for the MySQL installer. So you're going to go ahead and click on that, and then that'll bring you to this menu over here, and you can see here's the MSI installer. So we're just going to go ahead and download that. And it brings you to this page. It's asking you to like log in or sign up, but you can just click no thanks down here, and it'll go ahead and start the download. So this installer is really great because it will kind of configure everything for us, and it'll allow us to pick and choose what MySQL products that we want to actually download. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. All right, so let's go ahead and accept the license, and I'm going to click next. Now here we have a couple options for how we want to set this up. You can see you can just do like developer default, server only, client only. What we want to do is actually we're going to do a custom install. Now here's the thing, if you want you can just do the developer default, but that's going to install a bunch of stuff that we're not actually going to be using, or at least that I'm not going to be using in this course. So I'm going to go ahead and click custom because I only need to install a couple things. So the first thing we'll do is come down here to MySQL servers, and I'm just going to click using in this course. So I'm going to go ahead and click custom because I only need to install a couple things. So the first thing we'll do is come down here to MySQL servers, and I'm just going to click MySQL server 5.7 right here, and I'm going to go ahead and add that over here to the right side.
Бля, почему у меня другой инсталлер? Почему этого чела? Почему у него другой инсталлейтер? Пиздец. Ну вот, видимо, сейчас это да, вот это.
And then I'm going to here because I'm going to be just do an owns up the license, and I'm going to click next.
Блять.
So I'm going to go ahead and click this. All right, so let's go ahead and accept the license, and I'm going to click next. Now here we have a couple options for how we want to set.
Блять, если не хочу в программ Data, если, блять, я хочу нахуй диск D, блять. Блять. D. охуительно.
Set this up. You can see you can just do like developer default, server only, client only. What we want to do is actually we're going to do a custom install. Now here's the thing, if you want you can just do the developer default, but that's going to install a bunch of stuff that we're not actually, because I only need to install a couple things. I'm going to click MySQL Server 5.7 right here, and
Блядь, вообще, кстати, нет, там 3600, что-то там. Похуй, next accounts. Я могу вообще нахуй. Не знаю, блядь. Похуй. Похуй. Похуй, так. Так, ладно.
I'm just going to click down here to MySQL shell. Be using. I'm going to click download it. Once those two things are finished downloading, then we can just click next, and we can also.
Так.
Я просто вспомнил видоски Зарус.
Для Кологривова гордон – пустой звук.
Охуеть. Learning SQL in 5 minutes. Жестко. Жертва неизбежна, это правда. Супермен весом 200 килограмм. Bro wants to marry a cheating girlfriend. Бля, что за пиздец? Что за хуету вообще люди делают? О, это пиздатая тема.
Polishing the goddamn sword, you know what I'm saying? Polishing the sword. Concrete family, concrete industry, concrete goes up, always. Never
Niggas is
down.
not really killers, I seen them shoot out, they treat me like heroin. Everyone wanna be kings, but niggas too soft, see me, I got fair skin. We took the job, need to walk for the low, had to do us some calling in Carrollton. My niggas quick to resemble your wig, nickname you take cause he arrogant. Not in your bitch, make her carry my kids, treat that little bitch like a surrogate. Bought a new crib cause I needed more space, I come my new shit a terabyte. Only if niggas can see what I saw, take a walk on my shoes, they feel me. Dog up the government, knew what I knew publicly, honestly, they kill me.
Pussy.
We getting paper.
Paper.
I'm in the mood, maybe I'm fucking your bitch. Yeah. Better than a million. Niggas can't fuck with the boys. Pulling out new Rolls Royce, bitch on Morris, fill my board. Pack for blue like.
Бля, вообще, я типа вот задумался о такой вещи. То есть, типа, когда ты, блядь, вот заходишь в какое-то кафе там, или вообще неважно куда, покупаешь чашку кофе, ты ее выпиваешь полностью. Когда ты завариваешь кофе, типа, ну вот дома там взял, насыпал стакан себе, если у тебя нет кофемашины, залил кипятком, то у тебя на дне вот примерно там, ну вот, короче, сколько-то, не знаю, процентов 5-10 какой-то хуйни полной на дне. И то есть, типа, я думаю, ну как бы вообще неприятный момент. То есть, как бы, такая тема. Вообще, типа, думаю, быть брехтым неплохо. Getting paper. Ладно, let's go. Так, все, погнали.
Like boys, nigga too noisy, can't round. Keisha simple like John, need my crown, pearl like oysters. Why go shining like quarters? Sent on shoes, feel like orders. Ain't nobody gon' check me. 200,000 I spent on the necklace. Fuck my odds, I'm deadly. When I die, they put on my tombstone, all I want is respect. Concrete boy, boat, ain't no hold, that's on my set. Yes. Went from buddy pass to the first class, then we hit them jets. Yeah. Took that evidence with them big bullets, put down T-Rex. This ain't book club, this ain't study session, can I have some sex? I ain't never pissed off a no, baby, it's too many hoes. I ain't never content with my life, I got too many goals. I ain't never naked in no club, we got too many goals. They don't wanna cut no off, we got too many lows. Out in LA, I'm a little brother, we got too many balls. Niggas is pussy, we get it paper. I'm in a mood, baby, fucking your bitch. Yeah, better than millions. Niggas can't fuck with the boys. Pulling out the Rolls Royce, bitch on Morris, filling my void. Pocket fuck blue like boys, nigga too noisy, can't round. Keisha simple like John, need my crown, pearl like oysters. Why go shining like quarters? 10,000 shoes, feeling like hoarders. Us.
Читай по рукам, это М. Я ща вытрясу как бы. Оу, VPN, планета крутится,
Пиздатая
VPN.
шапка.
Сейчас понимаю, что не зря вложил бабки в этот VVS. Я ща такой нахуй всех давно выкинул TV-сет, only facts. Ведь я поверю больше девочки с OnlyFans.
Я мерз в этом бенде, не было бабок, мы питались пакетами. Я столько раз ломал кровать, когда ленька били девочек. На окнах много пыли, жира, подоконник под пепелом. Юрист мой, бог мой, первое правило этого челленджа.
Они хотят все сгореть и взорваться прямо на старте, воу. Это масс-маркет, я поджигаю сейчас и стригу их как барбер. Тут паразиты с отравой, магаз был ограблен, нету охраны. Ты бежишь за бумагой, но деньги пластмассы, поплыл бедолага.
Укрись на карте Москва, но родные ждут его дома. Киба-бой, большой блэс, пи как плеерс, you know it. Я мог носить туфли, галстук в офис все 4 сезона. Но встав на шлепке у плиты, я начал долго готовить.
Это движение мутанта, я еще не ментил, но много газа. Если ты проявишь тут хамство, из тебя сделают кастом. Мы берем это на улицах каста, общение на языке рамса. Общение на фактах, плеерс больше, чем клуб, это барса.
Читай по рукам, это М. Я ща тысячу как Б. Ног трудился, да, работал, да, на ногах мой кэш. Сегодня везет меня Бенц, но я не про тот Мерседес. Забрал ее прямо в инсте, другая пришла на концерт.
Котлета в лопатник, крус, миллион станцую, бля, как раз миллион спали. Ща как двигаюсь, я был в Питере, меня не видели. Смотрел мое М-видео, там техника, но это не М-видео. Хочу эти Мс, видимо, забрали эти Бенц, лишь грабители.
Сделал малышку грязно, скинул потом, как Брит Хайд-парк. Много внимания, М на пальцах, да, сегодня мутант. Моя команда готова к пятнам крови, соус как Хайнц. В сером костюме, наловой сумки, я открываю G-класс.
Читай по рукам, это М. Все мои делают Б. Меня везет БМВ, на пальцах ТП, но словил только Л. Где-то ща 5 на руке, как пекарь поставлю багет. Я и мой Кен скурил этот тент, холера дэнг.
Сипаю грязь на корте, кореш знает, кто играет сегодня. Но платок я роки, укрывает как зонтик от солнца. Мне пишут Джонни и суки, все в телеграме, программа я робот. Он дал ему щеку Смит, с такими я больше не буду работать, слушай.
Котлета в лопатник, крус, миллион станцуй. Как раз миллион спали, как двигаюсь, я был в Питере, меня не видели. Смотрел М-видео.
Забрал ее прямо в инсте.
Вообще милый.
it under my arm like a minigun. Nigga think he can take any of my hoes and sit back watch him receive a Cinnabon. Run out of the house and we find some hoes on my mama, the ratio 10 to 1. All of my exes look at me like God, I turn up facade. Buy a car, but it's still on my name. If that bitch try to leave, take it back like Rashad. 600,000 I stuffed in a pot. 10 different bitches, we made them hoes mosh. Makes my jealous soap when I wash. Give me that mouth, your body is botched. 2 different colors I have off for the fuck of it. Make it so much squat. I don't know what to do with this shit, but I promise I'm loving it. Bitches are brother, my mama, I'm dubbing it. Double dishing on the rims, I'm thugging it. Rob for X trying to X on mouth. Niggas want smoke, trying to see what I'm about. I want that bitch trying to live in her mouth. Niggas not rich. On my mama, niggas cold, bitch. Niggas will fold quick. Looking at his eyes, it shows snitch. Up that fire on his ass, bet he changed bitch. Left my house.
Проглотил сейчас семечки от яблока. Как думаете, вырастет яблоко внутри меня? А, блядь, аж не, вообще звука нет, да, нахуй? Нет, звук есть, хорошо. Так, все. Погнали, обучаемся.
So just click next through here, and you'll see it's asking us what we want. I'm just going to click standalone MySQL server, classic MySQL replication. That's all we need. And you can just leave all of this stuff, all this type in networking stuff as the default. And then over here, it's asking us to create a root password. So whenever we're using this MySQL database server, we're going to have to log into it using a account. So there's already a default admin account set up for us, which is called root, but we're going to have to give this a password. So I'm just going to type in password as the password. And again, down here. So make sure that you remember what this password is, because we're actually going to need it later. And if you want, you can add additional users. I'm not going to server at syschecked. Go through and do a bunch of super, almost done, finished installing. So I'm going to come MySQL 5.7 command line client. So we're going to actually go ahead and use that. And what this will do when I open it up, you'll say it says enter password. So I'm just going to enter in that password that I created. In my case, it was just password. And you'll see here we're actually logged in. So now we're connected to that MySQL server that is running on our computer. So from in here, what we can actually do is create a database. So I'm just going to say create database. And I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it draft. And then I'm going to type a semicolon. So with this,
Бля, так. MySQL command line. Так.
this will do is it'll create a database for us called draft. Now remember, MySQL is a database management system, which means it's an application or a software program.
Так, открываем сразу же. Сейчас, передвинь немножко. Так, открываем сразу наш... Блять, там что-то стрим, что-то как-то, да, стримлер. Как-то так это называлось.
That's designed to help us manage various databases. So in order to, start building a database, we need to create one. So I'm just going to say create database draft. I'll hit enter, and this is going to go ahead and create that data.
Так, queries, набор, так. В общем, создать таблицу, create a database. Погнали, create database. Купил.
Database for us. So now we base draft. I'll hit enter, and this is going to go ahead and create that database for us. So now that we've created this database, we're...
То есть, типа, он прихуел, стрелочкой показал,
kind of
типа,
ready
то,
to
что
go.
нужно
So
поставить точку
for the rest of the
запятой.
course, what I'm going to be doing is teaching you guys like SQL commands. So we're going to be learning all about this SQL language, which is used to interact with MySQL and other database management systems. Now, if you want, you can do everything that I'm doing for the rest of the course here inside of this terminal. So inside of this little terminal window, you can basically do everything that I'm doing. You can type in SQL, like this up here, create database. That's all valid SQL. But I'm actually going to be using a different program, which is called Pop SQL. And that program just makes it a lot easier for us to visualize what's going on. It's not like some, kind of boring terminal window. So that's basically a text editor, which will
Ну, конечно,
connect
вы, блядь,
to our
посмотрите на
database
этого
server.
кабанчика, нахуй. Потлатый, блядь. Какой-то ёбаный синей рубашке, блядь, с какими-то, нахуй, просто бидонами, нахуй, вместо рук. Глаза, блядь, какого-то додика, нахуй, небритый. Ну, блядь, просто ебаный додик. Видно, что, блядь, пожизненный девственник. Просто настолько вот, ну просто, блядь,
And we'll be
уебан, нахуй.
able to write our SQL.
Ладно, блядь, что это за негатив пошел? Почему так много мата вообще на стриме? Я осуждаю такую речь. Ну просто не знаю, что-то мне, ну типа он нормальный человек как будто. Вот ну, он выглядит как человек, который ходит по барам и вот пропускает, ну типа просто банку пива, типа ежедневно. Ну ладно, не ежедневно, но по пятницам. Ну такой кабанчик немножко.
From inside of there. So I'm going to show you guys real quick how to download that. You're just going to come up here. I'll make a new tab, and we're going to come up to the search bar and just type in POP Pop SQL, and you'll see this link here, popsql.io. So we're just going to click that. So here there should be an option to download for Windows, so we can just click on that, and that'll start downloading it for us. So Pop SQL is cool. It's kind of like Google Docs, but for writing SQL queries. Now, we're not going to be using that functionality.
А вот эта тема с задним бэкграундом мешем, это вообще прикольная тема. Блять, download, I don't give a fuck. Короче, тоже на каких-то виндосах там я делал.
We're just going to be using it as a text editor, but it's a great way for us to visualize like the SQL queries that we're writing, and then also like what gets returned from those.
So, red beam on top of the pole, I can see on North Cole.
Queries and stuff like that. So once that's done downloading, we can just click on it, and we're going to go ahead and run the installer. When that's done installing, it should open up right away, and you'll see we have to sign in. So you can either create an account just with Google, or you can create an account with your email, but you have to sign in order to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and you'll see it says welcome Mike. So we're able to sign in, and I'll open the app. So now that we have the app open, what it's asking us to do is connect to a database. So remember, we set up our MySQL database server, and we created a database. So what we can do now is we can connect to that database from inside of Pop SQL. So over here, it's just asking us to type in our nickname. So I'm just going to type in draft. And the type, if you click down, you'll see we have MySQL right there. Host name. So the host name is actually going to be localhost, and that just refers to like
Pop SQL. Что такое SSO? Fucking Coke. Блять. Что такое S? О, так. Да, блядь, какая organization, нахуй? Какая, блядь, organization? Просто student. Блядь, ну вот этот гомик мне рассказал.
the local address of the computer that you're currently on. Port is going to be 330. base. So what we can do now is we can connect to that database from inside of Pop SQL. So over here, it's just asking us to type in our nickname. So I'm just gonna type in draft. And the type, if you click down, you'll see we have MySQL right.
Uconnection. Amazon Asina. Антенна, блядь. Магазин. Антенна. Это просто антенна.
Right there. Host name. So the and the type, if you click.
Nickname. First try. Hostname. Какой там hostname? Миша вроде. Database у меня Opium.
Click down, you'll see we have MySQL, right? The first port is equal, then that should be the port number. And then finally down here, the database that we want to connect to was called draft. So that's what I named it. If you named it different from draft, put in the name there. And then username is going to be root. And the password is going to be the password that you set up. So in my case, it was just password. So once all that information's in, we can just click connect. And you'll see it's connected us to our database. So now we basically have a text editor that we...
Так, все. Блядь, что это? Это, если честно, она красивая программка, но... Да какие unlimited нахуй? У меня ни одной нет. 52.sql.
We can use code all on our learn some unfortunately complex programs. I mean, now we're in the course my relational database management systems around. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about data types. We're going to talk about creating tables. We're also going to talk about altering and deleting tables. So in the last tutorial, we set everything up. So we got MySQL set up. We also downloaded this program, Pop SQL, which is basically just a text editor that we can use to write all of our SQL code and all of that stuff in. So what I want to do in this tutorial is show you guys how to create tables, right? So we created a database. In our case, we created a database named draft in the last tutorial. And now what I want to do is start populating that database with different tables. In other words, I want to start defining our database schema. Now, whenever you're working with relational database management systems, your first step is always to create tables. So before we can start inserting any information, before we can start querying for information, we actually have to create the physical tables inside of our database. And we can do that by defining the table's layouts. And so what we want to do is we basically want to use a SQL command, which is called create table. And then inside of that command, we can pass in all the different attributes or all the different columns that we want our table to have. And so the
У меня эта программа как-то странно работает. Блядь, в чем проблема?
first thing I want to show you guys is the different types of data that we can store inside of our database. So over here, I actually just have a little list, and I'm just going to paste it in here. So these are all of the basic data types that we're going to be using in SQL. Now,
Базовые типы данных.
these aren't all of the data types. There are actually tons of data types, and depending on the relational database management system that you're using, a lot of them have like different data types to do different things. I would say that these 6 data types right here make up like the core SQL data types. Like these are probably the most common data types that you're going to see, but just keep in mind that there are a few others. Now we're using the MySQL database, and all of these data types are going to be able to be used in the MySQL database management system, and all of these are going to be used for the most part in any relational database management system. But like I said, specific database management systems will allow you to use different data types depending on how they want to implement things. So let's go through these different data types, and I'll kind of talk you guys through how to use them. So int, this is actually going to refer to an integer. So anytime you see int, just like that, int, that basically means any whole number, right? So this is any sort of whole number, but it can't have decimal places after it. If you want to be able to store decimals, you can use this decimal data type, and the decimal data type will allow you to store decimals. And you'll see we have this parentheses here after decimal, and I have m and n in here. Now these are actually both going to end up being numbers. So m is going to be the total number of digits that you want to store for this number, and n is going to be the number of digits that you want to store after the decimal point. So when we're working with databases, you have to be very specific about the different information and specifically the amount of digits that you want to store for a number. So what we could do is I could say like 10 here, and I could put a 4 over here. And what this means is we want to store a decimal number with 10 total digits and 4 of those digits coming after the decimal place. So you can specify, depending on how accurate you want these numbers to be stored, you can modify those numbers. Down here we have varchar, and this actually stands for variable char, or variable character. This is basically a way that we can store a string of text. So varchar, we have these parentheses after here, and you can put a number in here. So if I put a 1 in here, then this is going to store a string of text length 1. If I put 100 in here, this is going to store a string of text with 100 characters. So that means that the maximum amount of characters that you could store inside of a varchar 100 would be 100. And down here we have blob, which stands for binary large object. And this is basically just a structure that can store large amounts of binary data. So if you have, a lot of people will use these for like images or files, like you could store those inside of a blob, and they'll be able to be stored in the database. We also have date, so date will be like a specific date and time, and you can see we would format a date like YYYY-MM-DD. So this would be the year, 2-digit month, and then the 2-digit day. You can also have a timestamp, which is similar to date, but it's generally used for recording like when things happen. So you could record like when an item got inserted into the database or something like that. So over here, it's just YYYY-MM-DD, and then we have the hours, minutes, and the seconds. So those are all, like I said, the main data types that you're going to be using, but these aren't all the data types. So depending on the database management system that you're using, you want to check to see what specific data types they offer. But like I said, for the most part, these should work in just about any system. So now I want to talk to you guys about creating database tables. So what we can actually do is we can create tables, and we're going to have to use those data types to tell the relational database management system what types of data we want to store in each column in the table. So in order to create a table, we're actually going to type out some SQL. Now I'm just going to type out create table. And these are two SQL reserved words, create and table. And you'll notice that I typed them in all capital letters. Now, this is actually a pretty common convention when writing SQL queries. A lot of people will write these reserved words in SQL in all capitals, but you don't have to. If I wanted, I could write create table just like that, and you'll see it's getting highlighted the same way. The reason that people write these in all caps is because then it's easy to distinguish the SQL from any other text that we might be writing. So I would say for the most part, just stick with making these all uppercase and you should be fine. So I'm going to say create table, and then I want to type in the name of the table that I want to create. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a database table. So I actually have a database table set up over here. You'll see it's a student table, and it's storing just a list of students, like maybe in a college or university. So there's three things that we're storing about this student: the student's ID, the student's name, and the student's major. So we're storing all of this information about this student. So what I can do now is I can actually create this exact table inside of my database. So I can say create table, we'll call it student, and you'll notice that I made this lowercase. So this isn't an SQL reserved word, so I'm not going to make it uppercase. And then what I can do is I can just make an open and close parentheses and a semicolon. Now, any command that you write in SQL is always going to end with a semicolon. And if you're just starting out, you might forget to put that semicolon in there, but you want to make sure that you always put it in there. Otherwise, it's not valid SQL. So I'm just going to click enter, and then I'm going to go down here in between these parentheses. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start defining the different columns or the different attributes on this table. So what we can do is we can define a column name and then a column data type. So I could come over here and I could say the first attribute. So in my case, the first attribute for this table is going to be student ID. And you'll also notice that student ID is a primary key. So on this table, student ID is the primary key, meaning it's
Я не американец, я русский. Я русский, блядь, стопроцентный русский. Стопроцентный славянин, примерный семьянин, блядь, вот это все. Просто смысл в том, что я смотрю ролик, ну, я понимаю английский, типа, блядь, и я, ну, просто смотрю, что он делает, типа, пишу конспект, вот, конспект, как бы, сейчас просто тут не до конца сконфигурировал правильно, вот пишу конспект, в общем-то, и, короче, делаю то, что он делает, в общем, как-то так. Турбогомосек до 2.8. Я думал, этот мужик ты и есть. Нет, это не я. Просто я смотрю, вроде под роликом все есть, что это не я. Я скинул ссылку на оригинал. Можете смотреть.
Column on the table which will uniquely identify the specific row. So I'm just going to call this student underscore ID.
Я тоже как раз начинаю учить БД. Ну, круто, круто. Я вообще Django и React разработчик, просто хочу вот эти ORM движухи Django выучить, а там, чтобы оптимизировать запросы, нужно SQL знать, потому что я-то привык просто с Django все эти просто командами пользоваться, а я хочу ну, ускорить там query time и, ну, типа, улучшить, короче, время работы своих программ, оптимизировать как-то, поэтому для этого надо учить SQL. Надо учить SQL.
And now I need to give this a data type. So I'm going to give this a data type of int because all of these IDs, as you can see, are integers, right? They're just integer numbers. Now, because this is going to be the primary key for this table, I need to denote that. So over here, I can just say primary key, just like that. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell MySQL that this is going to be...
Можно в настройках сейчас файл, references. А можно этот фонд size как-то? Вот, да. Ну, хотя бы... Ой, блин. Вот так, я думаю, заебись будет. О, другое дело. А ты не знаешь программу, которая может вместо Excel... Вместо Бля, лайк ебаный. Вместо access, это который Microsoft Access. Ну вот я говорю, я вот по этому курсу этого челика я пользуюсь какой-то программой Pop SQL. Pop SQL. Поэтому хз. Честно вообще, только вот начал. Creating tables у меня. Мой уровень сейчас это просто creating tables. Да я уверен, дофига этих типа SQL-вьюеров. Смотря тоже какую-то мучишь бдшку, там MySQL, там Postgres, типа. Зависит.
Primary key for the table. Next thing we want to store is the student's name. So I'm just going to say name, and the name is actually going to be a string. So this could be like Jack or Tommy or Kara, right? It's a name that we're storing about this table. So over here, I'm going to make this a varchar, and then I'm going to make an open and close parentheses. Now remember, with the varchar data type, we have to tell MySQL how many characters we want this to be able to store.
Ну это чисто max
So with
length,
someone's name, what you
Django,
want to do is
чисто
you basically just
max
want to think like,
length.
how many characters do we really want to allocate to storing someone's name? Because here's the thing, if I allocated like 1,000 characters for someone's name, well, in reality, normal people don't have a name with 1,000 characters, right?
Почему нет?
I mean, maybe your name would be 20 characters or 30 if you're really pushing it, but 1,000 is just totally out of the bounds of reality. And you have to think, if you're
Это
storing
правда.
like millions of names potentially, you know, allocating 1,000 characters to each name when you only need 20 is going to take up a lot of extra space in your database.
Да, это правда.
So I
Очень
think what
много
we should do is maybe
лишнего
say like
добавить.
20. So let's say that the maximum length of someone's name we want to store is going to be 20 characters.
Я вообще
And really, you
студент
know,
и
depending
нейронки
on
и
the
машин
domain of the
learning хочу.
application.
Ну, а где учишься, в каком университете? Нейронки, машин learning. Что-то какое у тебя там специальность, какое у тебя направление по машин learning? Такое интересное. Студент и машин learning. Ну, круто. Рада тебе, мужик. Так, короче, я учусь на мехмате НГУ. Это типа Новгородский государственный. Но круто. Я учусь в школе. Так. Максимальное число символов. Ну, круто. Мехматен.
That you're building, that's going to be different. But in my case, let's just say it's 20. And then finally, we wanted to store...
Там... Я вообще удивлен. Я типа раньше думал, что Новосибирск это типа маленький город, но там то ли 1,5, то ли 3 миллиона человек. Вообще. Я реально раньше думал, что это маленький город. Но... Да... Хорошо, нехорошо. Мне просто делать нечего. Вот и учу. Так.
For the student's major. So I can say over here major, and this is also going to be a varchar. So why don't we also allocate 20 characters to their major, and that should be enough. So you'll notice that I'm defining each of the attributes, each of the columns on the table, and then I'm putting a comma, and then I'm defining the next column, and then I'm putting a comma, and then the final column. So this right here, this create table statement, is basically going to create this table over here for us, right? We have a primary key, which is an int, and we have a name and a major, which are strings. So that's going to go ahead and do that for us. Now, from inside Pop SQL, what's really cool is we can just click on this query right here, click on this SQL statement, and I can come over here and click run. And what this will do is it'll automatically run this.
You have an error. Где error? Понятно, в чем error. Так.
SQL on our MySQL database
Let's
server. So I'm going to
go.
click run, and you'll see over here we get a success message that says rows affected 0. So that actually was able to create that new table in our database. So that is basically how we could create a table. And now we have this table stored in our database. I want to show you guys another thing we can do. So over here, I'm defining the primary key. So student ID was the primary key, right? It's the one column that's going to uniquely identify each row. And if you want, you can put primary key over here after like student ID. Or what you can do is you could get rid of this and you could define this down below. So instead of defining the primary key up here next to student ID, I could come down here and I could change it. So I could say now primary key, and then I can make an open and close parentheses. And in here, I could put the name of the column that I want to be the primary key. So in my case, I'll just say student ID. So now what this is saying is that this primary key is going to be student ID. So this is equivalent to what I was doing up here. It's just another way that you can do it. And so now we already have our table created, so I'm not going to go ahead and create it again. All right, so now that we have our student table created, let's go ahead and make sure that it got created correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to type out another MySQL command. So I'm just going to type out describe, and then I'm going to type
На
in the
каком
name of the
курсе ты
table.
учишься, если еще
In our
остался?
case, it's going to be
Ты,
student.
наверное, ушел уже
And you'll
со
notice
стрима.
with Pop SQL, if I click over here on this query, it gets highlighted in that blue color. And if I click down here on this query, it gets highlighted. So what you can do with Pop SQL is you can have like a query up here, and you could run that query, or you could click on this query down here and run it. So I'm going to click on describe student, and then I'm going to click run. So you'll see that it's actually describing the table that we just created. So there's a list of all these different fields. We have student ID, name, and major. It's telling us the data types that we're storing. So like varchar 20. And then it's telling us a bunch of other information, which we're going to get into later. So what this did is it basically described everything about this table. So now what I want to show you guys how to do is delete and modify a table. So now that we've created a table and we saw that it got created correctly, if you wanted, you could delete the table. So what I could do is I can come down here and type out drop table, and I can just type the name of the table. So in our case, it's the student table, and a semicolon. And now I'm going to click on here and I'll click run. And what this is
Короче, так. Показывать структуру таблицы у нас команда describe. Получается,
it's going to do is it's going to drop that table. So now if I came up here and I clicked on describe student, in other words, I'm saying that I want to execute this command, and I clicked run, you'll see that
Так, получается, drop table. Так. Так, drop table удаляет таблицу. Удаляет таблицу.
it says no such table, right? Table draft.student doesn't exist because, remember, we just dropped it. So what we can do is we can actually create it again. So I'm going to click on this create table query, and I'll click run, and that'll go ahead and create it. So now if we click describe student, you'll see we get the table back because we created it again. So you can drop the table. You could also modify the table. So let's say that after the table was created, you wanted to give it another column. What I could do is I could add another column. So I could say alter table, and then say student, because that's the name of the table, and then I can say add. So what this is going to do is it's going to add an extra column onto the table. So why don't we add a column for GPA? So we could store a student's GPA, and that's going to be a decimal. So I'm just going to click a semicolon, and this is going to go ahead and end off this command. Now with decimal, remember I showed you that you could put numbers after here, like 1 and 2. So what we're going to do is generally a GPA would be like 3 point something something or 4 point something something. So we're going to have this be 3 total digits with 2 of the digits occurring after the decimal point. So now I can go ahead and run this command, and you'll see it says
Короче,
says success down here. So if we were to describe the student table again, if I just click on this and click run, now you'll see we have that extra column in here, GPA, and it's a decimal 3.2. So that is how we can drop a table, and that's also how we can alter a specific column. If you wanted, you could also drop a specific.
Так, student GPA сейчас. Почему, где у меня GPA? Блин. Вернуться бы хотелось, но...
column, so I could say alter table student, and over here I can just say drop column and just type in the name of the column. So what this will do is it'll drop that GPA column from the table. So let's go ahead and run. We get the success message. Now if I describe the table and I click run,
Так, drop column GPA. Так. Так.
you'll see that the GPA field went away. So I actually dropped that field. So you can create tables, we can add columns onto tables, we can remove columns from tables, and then we can just remove the table altogether. So hopefully that shows you guys some of the basics of doing those operations on tables. Now, obviously, whenever you're creating your database, the first thing that you want to do is define your database schema. In other words, you want to create all the different tables, and then you can start inserting data into the tables as such. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about inserting data into tables. So we'll actually insert some student information.
Так. Так.
Into our student table. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about inserting data into database tables. So in the last tutorial, we set up our first table, which is this student table, and you can see up here. And then down here, we described the student table, so it has student ID, name, major, etc. So now that we have our table set up, we want to actually start inputting information, right? We want to start storing some different data. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. I'm going to leave this create table statement up here because we're actually going to come back to that in a sec. But down here, I'm going to show you guys how to insert values. So in order to insert a piece of information into a table, we just want to type out insert into, and now I want to type out the name of the table. So in our case, we have this student table, and then I just want to type out values. So basically we're saying insert into the student table, the values, and then over here I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and a semicolon. So now this is actually a full statement. So remember, we need to end this off with a semicolon. Inside of these parentheses, I can actually put the information that I want to store. So the way that the table is set up, we have the student ID first, then the name, then the major. And that's the order that we want to put this information into the table. So I need to put the student ID first, the name, and then the major. So over here, I'm just going to type in the student ID. So we're going to be actually entering in the same information that we have over here. So this is kind of like our little template. So we have the first student, Jack, who's a biology major, and the student ID is 1. And you can see we just keep going from there. So I'm going to insert, roughly this same information. So the first thing we want to do is put the student ID. So that's going to be 1. And you'll notice that with an integer, I can just type out the number 1. And then over here, we're going to put in a varchar 20. So basically, this is going to be a string. Anytime we're typing out strings in SQL, we're going to make these double quotation marks.
Ну, короче,
And
как
then
у
in here, we can
JSON-чика,
type out the
походу.
string.
Как у
So the
JSON-чика
student's name
похожая
is going to
схема.
be Jack. And then another comma, and we're going to put in his major, which is biology. So we have Jack with a student ID of 1, and his major is biology. So insert into student values 1, Jack, biology. This is going to go ahead and insert this value into the database table. So now when I click run, and you notice all I have to do is just click on this query and then click run. It says down here, success rows affected 1. So we affected 1 row in the student table. So now what
Certain the student values 1. Так, Jack. А в чем проблема-то? Не могу понять.
we can do is we can actually see how this got inserted into the table. So what I'm going to do is actually below here, I'm just going to type out select asterisk from student. And this is actually a very simple SQL command. What this is going to do is it's going to grab all the information from the student table. And we're actually going to spend a whole tutorial just talking about using select. But for now, just know you can type select asterisk from student. And this is going to go ahead and give us all the information from the student table. So I'm just going to
Ща. Insert into. Не, в чем проблема-то? Column-то count doesn't match value of count. Не до конца понимаю, в чем проблема. Возьмем, поставим 2, допустим. Ну, окей. Вот если 0 взять поставить. Ну, хорошо.
click on this query and I'll click run. And you'll see down here we get this
Сейчас select from student. Ну так,
table here, and I'll click run.
ну так в чем проблема? Select insert into student values. Ну, здесь а что не так?
Run. That's all the info. Just enable. Ask you is actually below here. I'm just going to type out
Ну, окей. Правда.
Select asterisks from student. And this is actually a very simple SQL command. What this is going to do is it's going to grab all the information from the student table. And we're actually going to spend a whole tutorial just talking about using select. But for now, just know you can type select asterisks from student. And this is going to go ahead and give us all the information from the student table. So I'm just going to click on this query here, and I'll click run. And you'll see down here, we get this table. So it says student ID 1, name Jack, major biology. So far in the student table, we have one student, which is Jack, and he's a biology major. So why don't we actually insert another student? So I'm going to keep this same line of code, except now I'm going to insert a student with ID 2. And this student's name is going to be Kate, and she is going to be a sociology major. So we have Kate, whose ID is 2, sociology. So if I click on this command here and I click run, this is going to go ahead and insert Kate into the database. So now I'm going to click on select all from students, or select asterisks from students, and we'll click run. And now you can see we're getting all the information from the student table. So we have Jack, and then we also have Kate. So we added in, so far we've inserted in 2 people into there. So what you could do is you could basically use this same format in order to keep inserting students into the student table, right? As long as you have their ID and you have their name and their major, then everything is good. But I want to show you guys another thing we can do. So let's say there was a situation where we had a student who didn't have a major, right? Maybe they just, had no major, or we didn't know what their major was, so we couldn't insert it into the database. Well, in a situation like that, we could actually modify this statement a little bit. So I could say insert into student, and then after student here, I can make an open and close parentheses, and I could type out the names of the columns or the names of the attributes that I have or that I want to insert. So I could say like student ID and then name. So you'll notice that I'm not including major in here. And what that means is that over here in this value section, we can include the student ID and the name, but we don't have to include the major. So like if I don't know what the major is, like I can't obviously put anything there. So by saying student, open and close parentheses, and then specifying the 2 attributes that I do have, I can then just put them over here and I won't get an error by not including it. So now we can change these values. So we'll change the primary key to 3, and then let's see who the next student in our database is. So it looks like it's Claire. So we'll have Claire, and then we can go ahead and run this query, and you'll see rows affected 1. So we added in another row. But if I was to select all this data, so I'm going to click select again, and I'm just going to click run. Now you'll see that Claire's student ID is 3. Her name's Claire, but her major is null. So we didn't actually enter in a major for Claire, and therefore inside the major field, she's getting a value of null. And that's actually pretty common. So that's basically going to be what happens when we don't enter in something. And so what you can do is you can specify what pieces of information you want to insert into the table by specifying them over here. And then here in the values section, you just have to add those pieces of information. So that's 2 ways that you can insert something into a database table. And it's important to notice that you can't insert duplicate entries. So if I was to try to insert this again, you'll see that the primary key is still 3, which means I'm not going to be able to enter this record in because a record with that primary key already exists inside the table. So if I was to click run again, you'll see I'm getting this error. It says duplicate entry 3 for key primary. Basically what that means is we have a duplicate key and it's not going to work. But if I was to change this to 4, so instead of having an ID of 3, it's 4. Now this is going to work, and we'll be able to see we have 2 entries with Claire, but they have different student IDs, so we're all good to go. So that is the basics of inserting stuff into a table, and really those 2 techniques are really useful. So that's kind of the basics of inserting into a table. Now there's a lot of more things we can get into with this, and in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you guys some other stuff that we can do in order to make inserting into the tables a lot easier.
C. Просто это как буква B, просто буква C.
In this
Constraints.
tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys.
Так, ща. Просто мужик латерси нафиг. Now I book my trip. Так. А, 50 минут.
Some more about inserting information into a database. So in the last tutorial, we kind of looked at the basics of inserting information. So we have our table here, it's the student table. And down here, we kind of looked at how we can insert information. So we can say insert into the name of the table and then values, and we can pass in the values. We could also say insert into the name of the table, and then over here, we could specify what information we want to insert. And then here in the values, we just insert that information. So we've kind of been using this photo over here.
Ща. Сколько уже было, можно пару минут поиграть. Просто кайфануть.
Psyching out. Bro pulling pistols on anyone. Hopped out the car with a big SK, grip it under my arm like a minigun. Nigga think he can take any of my hoes and sit back watching receive a Cinnabon. Run out of house and we found some hoes on my mama, the ratio 10 to 1. All of my exes look at me like God, I turn up facade. Buy a car, but it's still on my name. If that bitch try to leave, take it back like Rashad. 600,000 I stuffed in a pot. 10 different bitches, we made them hoes mosh. Makes my jealous soap when I watch. Give me that mouth, your body is botched. 2 different girls I have off for the fuck of it. Making so much squat. I don't know what to do with this shit, but I promise I'm loving it. Bitches a bird of my mama, I'm dubbing it. Double dishing on the rims, I'm thugging it. Robber X trying to X on mouth. Niggas want smoke, trying to see what I'm about. I want that bitch trying to live in her mouth. Niggas not rich. On my mama, niggas cold, bitch. Niggas will fall quick. Looking at his eyes, it shows snitch. Up that fire on his ass, but he changed, bitch. Left my hot head brother home, he too dangerous. Oh shit, Rocky Road. He not tough, he told. 150 my shows. Pull up with 3 model bitches, Coca-Cola nose. Kamikaze, middle of the party, my nose feel extra snotty. My deposit, Mona Lisa profit, can't fit in no one's wallet. Who is watching, fuck on a balcony with ML.
That shit, niggas with guns in their videos is corny anyway, you know what I'm saying? Niggas be having all type of motherfucking revolvers. Niggas be having little pocket rockets, Glock 9s, Dracos. I don't type this shit. It's your favorite type of thing. Play the new chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper. Watch this. Say less.
New chopper, it came with the beam. Activist pouring the lean. Got Flacco, yeah, Rocky, he passed me the beam. I shoot like a king. All of these nuts in my jeans. Alexander, I'm a queen. Diamonds, they looking like ice. Out with the hole like I'm ice. Stack on my cash, I got height. Take advantage of the Sprite. Take the bando, bring the height. We just go hard on the kids. Had to catch up on my bitch. They know that young nigga be lit. Run it all, run it all, run it all. Chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper, Run it all, run it all, run it all.
Короче, песня идет 2:33 на первую минуту, там просто вступление.
I roll up a L in the lobby, my partner's got wops and it's probably a Glock or a Tommy. From H to the E double hockey sticks. Keep a chopper, chop you if you try me, bitch. Let's see who next on my homie list. Cardi like Rocky, you body this. Since my prerogative, shit on them, that's on my potty list. Accused of being bougie by a snobby bitch. Cops on the ideas, healthy as fast as my ID does. She say I'm special, that's obvious. Rich cause my ideas. Run up the racks for the most part, I rap when they ask what my hobby is. Run it up, not one of them. Rich as fuck, I'm 100 up. Swipe, swipe like I'm on a bus. It's ASAP and I ain't wanna rush.
Run it all, run it all, run it all. Chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper.
I ain't hear what you say.
Run it all, run it all, run it all.
Get the fuck up out the way. Don't let it play a play.
Run it up. New chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper. New chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper. Run it all, run it all. New chopper, new chopper, new chopper, new chopper.
Да, это просто new chapter конкретная. Вообще пиздец, что-то, блядь, сил вообще нахуй нет. Вот сколько там, час постримил, из них, я не знаю, минут как будто 25 я просто ебланил там, 100%. 25 минут из часа 14 я ебланил. Я просто вообще, блядь, сил нет вообще, нафиг. Я просто, блядь, сейчас буду смотреть это через силу, но энергии вообще нет, я устал, пиздец. Просто устал, пиздец, устал. Не знаю, я нихуя не делал сегодня. Там, блядь, просто сколько... 3 урока в школе сидел, потом пошел домой. Вообще, я ничего не делал, я тупо устал. Очень устал. Это вообще.
Here of this, like, you know, student database, and I actually just went ahead and wrote out all the code for inserting all of these different students into the database. So you'll see we're inserting Jack, who's a biology major, Kate, sociology, Claire, who doesn't have a major. There's another one named Jack, who's also a biology major, but you'll notice that it has a different primary key than this guy up here. And then there's Mike, who's computer science. So these instructions will actually insert each of those students into our database. And you'll see over here when I run this select asterisk from command. So with PopSQL, if you just click on the SQL statement and then you click run, it'll go ahead and run it for you. So you'll see down here, we get all that information. So our database is set up. And that's sort of like the general...
Тёмыч, смотри, как я назвал табличку. Табличку как назвал. Табличка называется Opium. Opium Sheet. Opium Sheet. Opium Sheet.
General use case, right? That's like we set up our database table and we're just straight up inserting information into it. But there's some other stuff we can do. Namely, we can actually set up our database table in order to make it easier for us to insert elements or to control the type of information or the type of rows that we can insert into the database table. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually just going to drop this table. So I'm just going to say drop table student, and we're actually just going to start over. So again, with PopSQL, all you have to do is click on the SQL command. Like I could click on drop table right here, and then when I click run, it'll go ahead and drop it. So now if I try to select all from the student table, you'll see it says there's no such table. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you guys how we can create
Что он там как-то
It'll go
нажал?
ahead and drop it. So now if I table right here, and then when I click run, it'll go ahead and drop it. So now if I tried to select all from the student table, you'll see it says there's no such table. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you guys how we can create this student table in order to make it a little bit easier for us to insert stuff. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is something called not null. And not null will basically allow us to define that a particular column in the table cannot be null. So let's say that when we're storing our students, we don't want the student to be able to have a null name. And null is basically just a value that represents no value. So if something is null, it means that it doesn't have a value. So let's say that we always want the student to have a name no matter what. Well, after I say name varchar 20, what I could do is I could say not null. And I'm just putting that right after here. What that means is this column can't be null. So if you insert a row into the table, you can't insert null for a name. I could also do something else, which would be unique. So unique is another keyword which we can use. And basically what this is going to mean is that the major field has to be unique for each row in this table. So if somebody else or another row in the table has the same major as another entry, then that will get rejected. So not null and unique are actually pretty useful. So now what we can do is we can actually create this table. So I'm just going to click on this query and I'm going to click run, and you'll see that we get a success message. So we were able to create the table. And so now why don't we start populating this table with information? So I'll come over here and I'll click insert into student Jack biology. So we're going to insert Jack, and then we'll select the table and you'll see that Jack got inserted just fine. Let's click on this second one, Kate sociology. So we'll run this, and again we'll just select all from the table. You'll see both of those got inserted. So now we get down here into this next one. So insert into student. So for Claire, we're inserting in student ID and name. But let's actually switch this up. So why don't we get rid of this, and instead of saying this, why don't we'll give her a major. So we're going to say that Claire's a chemistry major, but we're actually going to get rid of this name. So instead of saying Claire, I'm just going to say null here. And you'll notice up here, I said that the name cannot be null. So when I created this table, I specified that the name field cannot be null. So if I come down here and I try to insert a student with no name, with a name that's set to null, and I click run, you'll see that we get this error, and it says you have an error in your SQL. And basically what that means is we can't insert in a value here that's null because we specified that it can't be null. Null up here. So you're actually not going to be able to do that. Now, we also, over here on this major field, we define that it has to be unique. So if I come down here and I try to execute this line, so you'll see we're trying to insert, this person's name is Jack, and they're a biology major. But we already defined one person that was a biology major up here, right? It was this first one. So if I try to enter in another biology major, it's going to give me another error. So I'm going to click run, and you'll see down here it says duplicate entry biology for key major. So it yelled at us because we entered in a duplicate entry. So not null and unique are really good ways for you to kind of control the data that gets stored on the table. And actually, funny enough, if you have a primary key is actually just an attribute or a column on the table that is both not null and unique. So a primary key is basically just something that's not null and unique. So there's a couple other ones. So we're actually going to drop this table again. So I'm just going to click drop table, and we'll go ahead and drop the table. And over here, I'm going to create the table again, but we're going to give this some other stuff. So these are actually what we would call constraints. So I would say like a constraint would be that it's not null or that it's unique, but there's a couple other constraints that we can add that I want to show you guys. So let's say that we wanted to set a default value. So let's say that if somebody didn't enter in a major, we wanted to be able to give them a default major. Well, I can actually say that something has a default. So I can come down here and I could say after major default, and then inside of single quotes, I can just type in what I want the default to be. So in our case, if somebody doesn't provide us with a major, why don't we just say that they're undecided? So basically, if the major field is left blank, we'll say that the person is undecided. So then down here, why don't we go ahead and insert a student into the table that doesn't have a major. So here we can just say insert into student, and we'll go ahead and specify that we're going to insert in the student ID and also the name. But you'll notice that I'm not putting major in here, which means that we don't have to give this a major. So now we'll get rid of Jack's major, and when I go ahead and run this, you'll see that we got a success message, and if I was to select all the entries from the student, it says student ID is 1, his name is Jack, and his major is undecided. So because I didn't insert a major, it's going ahead and put 3, 4, 5, etc., right? I like manually went in and incremented all of those primary keys. But what you can actually do is you can have the database do that for you. So I could come over here and right here after student. So remember, student ID is the primary key, right? We define that down here. I could come over here and say auto increment. And auto increment is basically going to specify that the data that gets inserted into here is going to get automatically incremented every time we add one in. So I could actually come down here, and instead of inserting a student ID, I could just leave it out. So I could just insert the name and the major, and then I can add that information in here. So Jack is going to go ahead and study biology. And actually, let me get rid of these so we can kind of see how this works. So I could copy this for another one, and we'll make this Kate, and she's studying sociology. So you'll notice that I'm not actually inserting the student ID, right? All I'm inserting is the name and the major. But because we said that this table was going to be auto-incremented, in other words, because we said that the student ID was going to be auto-incremented, we don't actually have to do that. So I could come down here and I could run this, and actually, whoops, I have to create the table again.
Что там этот автоинкремент значит?
So the data that define that down here, I could come over here and say auto is come over those primary, and right here do is you can student based. Remember auto that the data that gets inserted into here is going to get automatically incremented every time we add one in. So
Так. Auto-increment.
Data that gets inserted.
Если честно, не до конца понял, что он имел в виду, поэтому смотрю в интернете auto-increment в SQL. Все, понятно. Так, понятнее чуть-чуть.
Inserted into here is going to get automatically incremented every time we add one in. So I could actually come down here, and instead of inserting a student ID, I could just leave it out. So I could just insert the name and the major, and then I can add that information in here. So get rid of these. So, and we'll make not actually inserting the student ID was going to be auto incremented. In other words, because we said that the student ID was going to be auto incremented, we don't actually have to do that. So I could come down here and I could run this, and actually, whoops, I have to create the table again, my bad. So we're going to create the table, and I could insert in this first entry, Jack, who's a biology major, and I'll run this, and you'll see it says 1 row affected. And then I'm also going to insert this next one, which is Kate, who's studying sociology. So I'm just going to click run. And so now see down here that we get both rigorous, yet they still showed up. Way for you auto increment table, we would call those, and a little bit more of an advanced way for you guys. Database table. So in the last few tutorials, we've looked at creating database tables and inserting information into them. But now, once we have that information inside those tables, I'm going to show you guys how to update it and delete it whenever you want. So we have here our student database, and this is, or the student table, and it's the table that we've been using throughout the course. And so down here you can see it's just a bunch of students, and they have names, majors, and IDs. So right now, these are all of the students that are stored inside of our database. So these are the database entries that we can work with. The first thing I'll show you guys how to do is update some of these entries. And so, let's say that we wanted to, update something. So let's say that we wanted to change the name of one of the majors in our school, right? So let's say I am the database administrator for my school, and we decided that instead of calling the major biology, we wanted to call it bio. So the official name for the major is no longer biology, it's just going to be bio. Well, we could actually make that change inside the database. So I can use a special keyword called update, and I can just type out the name of the table where I want to do the update. So in our case, it's student. And over here, I can say update student, and I want to set major equal to bio, right? But here's the thing. I don't want to set the major equal to bio for all the students. I only want to set the major equal to bio for the students who have their major as biology. So over here we can specify that. I could say where, and here I can put a condition. So I could say major is equal to biology, and I'm gonna put a semicolon. So this whole thing now is one SQL statement or query. So what I'm doing is I'm updating the student table, and I'm setting the major column equal to bio where the major column is already equal to biology. So now if I was to go ahead and run this, you'll see it says rows affected 2. So we updated 2 of the rows in this database. And if I was to select all of them, and I'm going to click run, you'll see down here now for the 2 students who are biology majors, all of them, and I'm going to click run. You'll see down here now for the 2 students who are biology majors, it's now saying that they're bio majors, right? So it updated the database only in those places where the student's major was equal to biology. And that's what we can do here. So this is just a very basic update statement, but we can use this in order to do all sorts of stuff. So let's do another one. We could do the same for computer science. So I could say update student, set major equal to comp sci, where major equals computer science. So I'm basically abbreviating this major. So let's go ahead and run this. And again, I'm just going to select all from the table. You'll see down here, Mike, who used to be a computer science major, is now a comp sci major. So I was able to update that. Another thing you can do is you can update specific things. So I could say like update student set major equal to comp sci where, and then over here I could do a different condition. So I could say like student ID is equal to 4. So now I'm updating the student's major who has an ID of 4. So this is like a different type of query.
Короче, это получается так.
So down here, I'm running that, and then I'm going to select all. And so now you can see that Jack, who used to be a comp sci, or who used to be a biology major, is now a comp sci major because his student ID was 4. So you can get kind of creative, you know, playing around with setting different things and then checking different conditions. You could also use more complex conditions down here. So down here we have bio majors and we have chemistry majors, right? Well, let's say that any student who is either a biology or a chemistry major is now going to be a biochemistry major. So we're combining those two majors together. Well, I could update that here. So I could say update student set major equal to biochemistry, where major is equal to bio. And over here we could say or, and then we could also say major is equal to chemistry. And this is going to give us some or logic. So now if the student has a major of bio, or if they have a major of chemistry, we're going to set it equal to biochemistry. So we're basically combining those two majors together. So now I'll click run, and you can see rows affected is 2, and I'll select all from students. And you can see now Jack and Claire, Jack used to be a bio major, Claire used to be a chem major, are both now biochemistry majors. So you can use or in order to check multiple things like that. You can also set multiple things. So over here, I'm actually going to get rid of this condition, and I could say set name equal to Tom and major equal to undecided, where student ID is equal to 1. So whoever has a student ID equal to 1 is going to have their name set to Tom and their major set to undecided. So let's go ahead and run this, and you'll see it says 1 row affected. So let's select all from the students table. And you'll see down here, the student with the ID of 1 is now named Tom and their major is undecided. So you can change multiple columns within the same query like I did up here. All right, so there's one more thing we can do, which we could actually get rid of this where. So this is actually optional. So if I got rid of where, I could then set something. So why don't we set major equal to undecided? So if I get rid of that where statement, this is just going to apply to every single row in the table. So now when we run this, you'll see rows affected was 5. And now when we select all from the students table, all of their majors are now undecided. So you can either select specific rows or groups of rows with that where, or you can just do it to all of them by dropping the wheres. So now I'm going to show you guys how we can delete rows from the table, and it's actually pretty similar to how we would update rows. So instead of updating a specific row or a group of rows, I could actually delete a specific row or a group of rows. So it's actually, like I said, pretty similar to update. I'm just going to type in delete from and then the name of the table. So in our case, it's going to be student. And you could actually just end this off right here. I can put a semicolon here, and this will go ahead and delete all of the rows inside of the table. But why don't we try to get more specific? So I'm going to try to delete a specific row. I can say delete from student where, and now I can specify a condition. So I could say like where student ID is equal to 5. So what this will do is it'll delete any students or any rows from the table that have a student ID of 5. So down here we just have one like that. So Mike, who's an undecided, was affected table. So I could say like where, and you could also do is equal table who have a name and he's no longer there. So just like we used, if you want, by extremely useful update and what's in this tutorial, I'm going to
Короче, все, блин. На сегодня заканчивается стрим. Спасибо всем, кто смотрел.